couple of weeks ago, I made a video about a problem I've been having for a while with Bambu Studio, at least Bambu Studio in my case, but this problem also affects Prusa Slicer, which I believe is where the problem is originated from, as far as I know. But I'm sure some genius in the comments would love to correct me on that. But this problem also affects Orca Slicer, since Orca is based off of Bambu Slicer, and Bambu Slicer is based off of Prusa Slicer. The basics of the problem is that due to advanced slicing code, there are some annoying and sometimes even detrimental breaks in the flow of the extrusion on some layers. The two main and only ones I've seen personally is one that happens under extruded text and another that happens over gaps and holes. One that happens under text seems to happen when there is extruded text, but it seems to not apply as much at all to recessed text, so text that's inside rather than bulging out. Why this happens, I really don't know. What I recall from other people, what they've said, is that it's basically just a slicing anomaly that happens due to how the 3D model is generated, especially that oftentimes the 3D model is an STL file. The other issue that occurs over gaps and holes, I do know how and why it happens. When there is an area that is going to start being built over an unsupported part of the model, or at least what it thinks that needs to be supported, but usually also inside the model, or what it thinks is inside the model, the slicer will try to make an initial bridging over the layer to support and hopefully ensure the successful printing and retain quality of the outer walls and layers. However, under certain circumstances, this extra support can cause defects, as we have explored in the last video. So now we are here to talk about how to fix these issues, or at least work around them. I've had this issue for over a year now in a guitar pick model that I created. It has a recessed logo on the first layer for branding because I was hoping to sell these as a product one day. There aren't many other options for putting the logo on the pick other than this method, which is why I don't want to simply remove it. I went to Reddit and asked about this, I think on the Orca Slicer subreddit, and possibly one or two others. It's been a long time, so I don't really remember exactly. Either way, I got no useful help, and in fact, I think I got no replies whatsoever. Within 24 hours of being posted on YouTube, the 3D printing community made various suggestions, made them respectfully, and was able to help me get to a final conclusion on how to solve my problem. But, of course, not long after, jackasses and dipshits started to flow in occasionally as well. And they showed the ever-growing darker side of the community. Anyway, I would like to show you the solutions that fixed my problem on my pick model, and show you some honorable mentions that may work better for your situation. To get a baseline, we will start with the default standard 0.20mm profile for PLA and for the P1P machine on Bambu Slicer. Let's slice the model and see what we're working with right off the bat. Before we begin with the slicer setting workarounds, here were a few suggestions that happen outside of the slicer and that might just be a little bit weirder. The first one is to use a step file instead of an STL. To test this, I opened the original file made in FreeCAD and exported the body as a step file as recommended. Then I imported it into the slicer and sliced it using our baseline profile, and it does nothing. It doesn't fix anything. The step model has the exact same outcome as the STL. However, the commenter did say they were using Prusa Slicer, so maybe there is some greater divergence of the code since Bambu Studio came out and forked or cloned off of Prusa Slicer. I think theoretically step files are supposed to be more accurate and workable 3D models. I think they have smoother, better curved, and overall more accurate geometries, and they might have the capability for better altering after exporting, but I'm not completely sure. I rarely ever work with these models. Either way, it is not helpful in my case. Next, someone said that FreeCAD makes some strange geometries that a few slicers don't like. So, to test this, I have to remake the model in Fusion 360. Luckily, I had already kind of started on this process. The only thing left to do is to add the logo on the bottom. Originally in FreeCAD I had to trace the logo over an image, but this time I opened an SVG in Fusion and placed it. This allowed me to have already made lines and stuff. This makes the imprinting process a lot faster, but it is also different looking. I exported the file in both a step and STL file. I imported both of them into Bambu Studio, and again, very little has changed. The only things that have changed is because of the things that came out different in the redesign. Looking at the model now, I may need to shrink the logo a bit, but that's irrelevant for the purposes of this video. Anyway, I will now be using the Fusion STL model for the rest of the video, since I have finally completed it, and I usually work in Fusion now anyway. I will also be using the STL because it is the most commonly shared file type. The slicer shouldn't have issues like this with it anyway, and to top it off, whether it's a step file or an STL seems to be irrelevant, at least in this case. And is also another case of people making, well, I was going to say matter-of-fact suggestions. Some of them kind of are, but yeah, they were not correct, even though they seemed very positive about all these things being the smoking gun. Next, we have a suggestion that is a bit strange. This guy had a long story that I'm not 100% sure applies to the situation, but in his final paragraph, he has an explanation of something that should help with the logo situation, though I'm not completely sure of what he means based off of the wording and the way he put it. I will do my best to interpret and recreate the suggestion, however. He says to simply separate the model from the logo and leave a 0.01 millimeter separation. This is directly quoted, and I hope you can see how this can be a little difficult to understand, at least, exactly. What I think he is saying is that in CAD, you should cut the model right above where the logo ends and leave a 0.01 millimeter gap between the logo layer and the rest of the model. Then he proceeds to say something along the lines of, because of the limitations of the STL format, when you export the model, it should reform one way or another, either in the process of exporting or in the slicer process. But either way, the file doesn't support 0.01 detail, so logically, it should keep the layers the same, but possibly trick the slicer into not creating the bridging. So I've done exactly what I said in Fusion here. As you can see, there is ever so slightly a gap between the first layer and the rest of the model. So I use the main export function of Fusion to save all of these bodies into one STL and import it into Bambu Studio. And either I did something wrong or this method is bogus, at least for Bambu Studio. The commenter did say they tried it in Orca Slicer, but I don't know why there would be too much of a difference unless the community of Orca developers are making real progress compared to Bambu Studio's devs. Either way, for my purpose, this is not the answer once again. So another suggestion that I got was to get the slicer to flow the model properly for the logo and the layer above it, then get the slicer to flow the number and the layer below that properly, then take the two separate G-codes, at least for the layers, the proper layers, and then splice them together at the proper points. Now, this is an interesting but beyond my skill level solution, so we also have other setting solutions that will be safer and much easier, as this suggestion can result in improper movements of your machine, can cause damage to the machine, or it can just simply not work right and have your print be all whacked out. Apparently, Maker's Muse has a video about G-code in general. I guess it has somewhat of something to do with this suggestion, but I was not linked directly to the video, so you know as much as I do at the moment. I did try exporting the G-code from Cura and importing it into Bambu Studio to get the proper start and end G-codes for the P1P, but have the layers and brains of Cura. But based on the preview, this may not work right based on the outer layers, though it may not be accounting for the squish. I'm not fully for sure. But I am, however, curious to see what happens. I may do that in this video, probably not. So you may have to get subscribed to see maybe a short about that. But I can't really do a whole lot to adjust that because it is G-code and G-code is final. And it was also meant to be printed, I think, on the Ender 3 V2 because that's the profile that I had on Cura. But based on what I'm seeing in the slicer, Bambu slicer, it still looks like it should be doable, just a little off or different. Lastly, a couple people recommended the Fix Model feature in Bambu Slicer. I have never actually seen this feature before, so I had to look it up to see how to do it. Knowing how to do it now, it is an easy solution to try out, though I think it is meant for more of corrupted files rather than broken geometry. I'm not fully for sure. How you do this is in the Prepare tab of the Bambu Studio slicing process. Hover your cursor over the model you want to repair. Right-click on it, and it should bring a bunch of options of stuff you can do down. Look for the Fix Model option. Currently, as of Bambu Studio version 1.9.7.52, this is the third option from the top of the function menu. Then you simply left-click on that option and let Bambu Studio work its supposed magic. Did it work for our purposes? Nope. The model is still just the same, unfortunately for us. So now we have all of the non-setting fixes that I remember I was told out of the way. Let's get to the two that worked for me best. There are two different suggestions that address the two different issues, but combined, they make the perfect printable model at least for my purposes in my case. So our first comment addresses the bridging issue. This comment was made by Tisco24, Tixo24. Sorry if I don't pronounce anyone's usernames right. You don't know how many times people have called me Bowsman12 before. Like, does that even sound right to you? Anyway, he made the suggestion to turn off bridge detection, set infill to 100%, and set top and bottom layers to 0 so that everything is printed as infill. So let's break this suggestion down. We talked a bit in the replies of the comment. First of all, the setting is called Detect Bridging Perimeters, and he said that he uses Prusa Slicer. I wasn't able to find this setting in Bambu Slicer, and he also says that it may not even really be helpful anyway. Next, we have the infill set to 100%. This is great for smaller models like mine, but for many other models, this may not be what you want. Also keep in mind that the infill pattern will probably need to be changed because 100% infill only supports the rectilinear pattern as far as I know. Then we have the top and bottom layer settings which work closely with the infill setting. So again, this may not be what you want, but it all depends on your situation, what capabilities you need, and how much plastic you're willing to use. Keep in mind that we will still talk about some other honorable mention solutions after these ones that worked for me here. So since we combine the two final suggestions, our model changes colors because the inner extrusions are now considered infill, and we have no more bridging above the logo. However, we still have the flow interruptions from the number up top. This is apparently a common issue for anyone putting extruded text on top of their prints. I was given a couple suggestions on how to fix this, but let's talk about the first one that worked for me. This comment was made by a person with an amazing username. The name is XXPizzaDemonXX, spelled and formatted in true gamer fashion. This solution apparently also works in Orca as well because that's what this user said they used to test this solution in. They said they disabled a setting called Only One Wall on Top Surfaces. In Bambu, under Advanced Settings, there are options in this name for first layer and top layer. In Bambu, this option is a drop-down, and to disable it, we select Not Applied. Now, the walls that were arbitrarily put in the middle of layer 3 are all put in the actual number on layer 4. With those two solutions combined, we get the perfect flow throughout the model as it should have been originally. Something I want to try here is seeing if the other first layer option would fix the bridging issues for any reason. So let's start from the default PLA 0.20 preset again, make only our one wall on the top surface not applied again. Then looking at the only one wall on the first layer option, this is only a checkbox, which comes default unchecked. Let's try checking it and see what happens, but thinking about this logically based on the name, I'm not hopeful for great results. And yeah, instead of making 2 parameters, it just makes 1 and doesn't affect the next layer up whatsoever. I thought I would try it since the other one worked, but no dice on this one. So now they talked about my main fixes. Now let's talk about some other suggestions made that may work better for you in your situation. This first one was made by Corey Siri. Sorry, again, sorry about the names. He said to just call him Corey. The suggestion was to set the perimeter count to 100 plus layers on layers with bridging. There aren't many settings involving the word perimeters, so I just substitute this value for the wall loop setting in Bambu Studio. So theoretically, this will have a somewhat similar effect to the 100% infill and 0 top and bottom suggestion, which he also mentions in replies to his own comment. However, this method will follow the outer shape of the object and make the layers concentrically rather than lay down the layers as the infill direction says. So let's see how this works in my case. So it has a bit of a strange effect with my model here. It has the effect on the first 2 layers of the model, but not after. On layer 3 and upward, it just follows the infill pattern and direction and gets rid of the number extrusion interruption without the other before mentioned setting disabled to fix it. Everything happening here is purely just because of this one adjustment. The one thing to mention quality-wise, which the guy also mentioned in a reply to his own comment, is that because of how the concentric shape is printed on layer 2, there will probably be more exaggerated sags seeping into the logo compared to the normal flow type. It also doesn't help that my logo is a bit bigger in my Fusion modeled version. In some places it comes close to or is starting to print in air without anything to be laid onto. So keep that in mind if you want to use this as your method for fixing your model. Another small thing to mention before we move on is that it does fix the bridging issue and creates one whole flowed shape on layer 2, but it just looks weird in Slicer because of the overhang wall detection. When I removed the overhang wall detection on the line type menu, I thought it would just remove a filter that's over the normal lines, but it does create independent lines when slicing. They seem to still flow continuously, but for some reason they are just weird in the slicer when viewing. So just to clarify, it should still print properly and with proper strength, but it just is weird when looking at it. Next seems to be another suggestion for fixing the text extrusion issues. This comment made by Abyssj or AbyssDJ says that you can set a setting called one wall threshold to 0 in Orca Slicer. This is not a setting in Bambu, but I would assume it does something similar to the only one wall on top surfaces dropdown that is in Bambu. This last suggestion is one of the first suggestions that I got, and the commenter didn't get back to me if I can use their username in the video, so I just won't to be safe. The comment said rotate the model on the Z-axis to align the bridging with the infill. I tried this by rotating the pick -45 degrees. Unfortunately, the bridging rotates with the model. So next I tried rotating the infill direction. I tried a few different values, but the bridging direction doesn't seem to change. So I made the infill direction 180 degrees. Now this doesn't solve our problem, because it still creates a fault line on the pick where it will be more likely to snap and at a much faster rate than it would if it had a continuous flow. However, under certain circumstances, this may be a benefit to your model in one way or another, still providing more strength, and it may just work better for you. But that is all the main suggestions I got to solve these problems. Some suggestions may have slipped through the cracks or may have been made after writing this script, so sorry if you weren't included. And I want to say thank you to everyone who made a suggestion and made them respectfully. There were a good handful of people that wanted to help and be a productive part of this community. Then, of course, there are some others that don't have the common sense about how to speak or whether or not their comment is even needed. I got a lot of criticism for making that last video, including a 60% like to dislike ratio with a not so small group of people on both sides, and even a scathing comment that got taken down soon or immediately after it was posted. The guy was just a real dickhole, so it's possible that he just got auto-removed by the bot moderation of YouTube. But if he removed it due to backlash on him, thank you to everyone who put the backlash on him, because that guy was an ass. Unfortunately for that guy, I have a copy of the comment because I get emails stating every comment I get, because normally I don't get very many comments, and I try to reply as many as possible. So at some point I'm going to make a video about replying to that comment. I'll block out his name because I'm not a complete shithead unlike him, but yeah, get subscribed for that. It's also unfortunate that during normal times, my comments are usually someone telling me some other genius way to make the Ender 3v3 SE better when it's already been said before, or it shouldn't need to be done in the first place. But anyway, I don't want to ramble on too much longer. Thank you to the good and helpful users of the 3D printing community, and for everyone else who wants to nitpick about details, semantics, and overall provide nothing besides just being a nuisance. And yeah, kindly do everyone a real favor, unlike your comment that you left, and stand on some train tracks for a while. If you liked this video or found it informative in any way, please leave a like. This channel is normally a music and 3D printing channel. I make content on guitar and occasionally bass guitar and drum gear. I also occasionally make educational content about musical subjects. Additionally, I make content about 3D printers. I review them on the occasion that I get a new one, and I make informational and tutorial-like content about various 3D printing subjects, from slicer issues to hardware issues, and I even plan to make some more CAD design videos soon. Currently, I only have a couple out, but they may not be very entertaining. So, if any of that sounds good, please consider subscribing. That's all I have to say for now, so I'm going to say bye-bye.